A good day to everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our second OP Virtual, Managing Your CDMOs, Advice from Professionals on Both Sides of Outsourcing. I'm Garguilo, Chief Editor of Outsourced Pharma. Some of you have already submitted some questions for us, and others, please do during the discussion if you like. Our speakers will do their best to incorporate them into their thoughts and further comments. With me today are 6 experienced and highly skilled professionals at this science and a whole lot of art of outsourcing and working productively and effectively with CDMOs. Their names and titles are listed in your speaker panel. As for me, I'm going to quickly step aside now. It's my pleasure to hand this over to today's moderator, Patty Seymour.
Thanks very much, Louis, and thanks all in the audience attending virtually, and also a big thanks to our panelists. So we're going to get started right away, and so Ken Baker, who's the Director of CMC Project Lead at Stage Therapeutics, why don't you start off and give us some of your thoughts on some of your best practices in this topic?
Thanks, Patty. I thought I'd start the conversation today by talking about some of the key skills that people need to successfully manage CDMOs. And when I was thinking through this, I thought there's sort of 4 key skills that you really need. And if I have time, I'll try and link them to how you can gain those skills working at a CDMO. If I don't have time, I know Dr. Montgomery is going to cover some of that as well. So I think one of the key things, obviously, you need to be able to do is understand the technical aspect of the work that you're doing with your outsourced partners. And one of the key reasons for that is to make sure that the work that's getting done is efficient. You don't want to be repeating experiments unnecessarily. That's going to waste time and money. For example, I know in the past we've been doing DOE work with certain people, and we've done a 12, 13 experiment DOE. Gone through all the analysis of the data and then worked out really that the DOE wasn't set up properly. We haven't been looking at the right variables. We haven't looked at a wide enough range of variables. And so, having done 2 or 3 weeks of work, we've got to start again. So you really want to make sure that you have that technical knowledge so you can, vet the work that's going on with your partners. And then another thing is you've got to make sure that the analytical methods and the work that you're doing in that area is correct and you validate the right things. I remember a time we were doing a GMP campaign, and right as we got to the last step, we realized that one of the residual solvents, the last solvent step, had been missed from the residual solvent method. So, then you've got to really struggle and try and develop and validate a method really quickly to incorporate that solvent. And that can lead to a lot of delays. So you really want to make sure that you have that expertise so you can look at what's going on and make sure nothing is missing. Because things get missed by everybody, and you want to make sure that you can try and catch those. I think a really important attribute is communication. As people managing outsourcing, we're the liaison between our outsourced partners and our internal stakeholders. So we really have to be able to communicate, to our outsourced partners what our priorities are, what needs to get done, and what our real short-term and long-term goals are. And then we've got to work and communicate internally to our teams about how things are going. Are there any potential delays? Are we going to impact, clinical trials, tox studies, and things like that? So make sure we keep our internal team informed. One of the other things that I've had done, and I'm sure a lot of the other people on the panel have done, actually have to advocate for our CDMOs. People can do a great job 99% of the time, but everybody remembers that 1%, of when things go wrong. And I think, it's often the case that management are quick to try and want to move away from a CDMO and try somebody else, if there's been an issue. But we know that we spent a long time building a relationship with that CDMO and building a trust between the 2 organizations. So we don't really want to just jump ship quickly. So often we're working through some of the issues that we're seeing with our management teams, explaining them to them, explaining why they happened and how they happened, and then, coming back to them and saying, look, I think we should continue this relationship. It's worth putting that effort into. I think, the third attribute is the one that I think we spend most of our time doing, and that's problem solving. A lot of our job is just resolving issues that are going on with the programs that we're managing. that can be a simple, simple. It can be, around production issues. There's always that unknown impurity that crops up right at the end of a production, and you got to figure out, what you're going to do about that. Very often that unknown impurity isn't real; it's an analytical issue, and you got to work with a QC team, an analytical team, just to verify that you really have a problem. And then if you do, and it's a real impurity, can you go ahead and work with a chemist to develop a method of purging that impurity? Or if that's not viable, can you go ahead and identify that impurity and maybe justify higher levels of that based on, existing tox data or new data that you generate? I know I had experience in the past where we actually had an unknown impurity right at the end at 0.10%, right on the threshold of acceptability. And we were concerned that, with time, that impurity might, fluctuate due to analytical issues, and we start seeing failures in our stability program. So what we went ahead and did is actually identify that impurity, understood what it was, and then we're able to actually adjust our specification to 0.15%, the ICH guidelines. There's obviously risk to that. You're not going to make sure that you're not, identifying a PGI, but we knew in that case we were going to be safe, and we went ahead and did that. Some other issues that you face on a regular basis are scheduling issues. You're working with your CDMO, you have your timelines, but they have their timelines. You want to make sure that, if they have an issue with a reactor, you can work with them to understand what redundancies there are. Can you get another reactor, or can I get another filter dryer if my filter dryer breaks, or whatever that is. Some other things, you got problem solver investigations. We all work with the quality teams trying to understand some issues that we've seen, and can we get to a root cause and work out what went wrong, and maybe help salvage a batch from a quality point of view. Again, issues where we've seen contamination. Can you get to why that contamination happened? I've seen pens in batches, I've seen desiccant in batches, and you really try and prevent that happening in the future, and also see if there's any way that you can, rework that batch and make it acceptable from a quality point of view. And then the other thing, you're problem solving things like risk assessments. As you get further in a life cycle of a compound, you start, putting together your documentation to support validation. You're doing large scale manufacturing. You really want to make sure you understand the risks involved in those activities. So, working through risks, understanding if the risks are acceptable, and then sort of brainstorming ideas into how you would mitigate some of those risks. And so the fourth thing that comes to mind is sort of the business aspects and the financial aspects of oversight of CDMOs. We're all working on contracts, those endless contracts, especially master service agreements, which are the bane of all of our existence. Working through all that with our legal teams and things like that. And then, working on budgets. Some of us are working on pretty large budgets. CMC tends to be the second largest budget within an organization behind clinical. I know in previous jobs, my budget has been as large as some of the other companies I've worked with. So we've got to work on those budgets, making sure we're tracking those budgets, making sure we're keeping with the spend, and if we're not, making sure we're communicating that to the team above. So that's some of the things that I was thinking about initially for today.
Great. Well, thanks, Ken. That was some really good advice to get us started. So, Steve, I'd like to get you on your thoughts now as what you are recommending for best practices.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Steve Collier, and I've spent a long time working at various CDMOs over the years. And really, I've come to believe over that time there's 5 pillars that make up a successful CDMO. And these are really strengths in process development, analytical development, and manufacturing from the operational perspective. There's quality assurance, which underpins all of the GMP activities. And then there's the business side, which really is overarching for the whole project. And there's also project management, which just weaves all of this together into a unified project. I think the reality is few CDMOs are truly strong in all 5 areas. And at times that can also depend on who you actually get on your project as well, which individuals are working on your program. And having had experience in CDMOs does provide you with some unique insights into these 5 areas and how it all interplays. And the potential tensions between these groups, and how to mitigate some of this. And I can give a couple of examples. And again, sometimes the perceived issue can be circumstantial, or it could be a more inherent issue with a company. But CDMOs are hungry, and they take on a lot of work, and they're often really busy, particularly the good ones. And if you feel there's a lack of strength or capacity or just time because of the timeline of your project, in process research and development or analytical development, one strategy you can take is to divide out work packages and put them in more specialized providers. This kind of links with some of what Ken was saying. You can use a secondary provider and then integrate the outputs of that work back into your primary CDMO. And some examples of that can be, impurity ID, looking at impurity synthesis and the fate and effects of these impurities in the process. Equally, analytical method development and co-validation. And you can look at how you leverage not just one CDMO, but a portfolio of these companies to get the right output, the right outcome for your project. Another example, another really important area is manufacturing. And when you've worked on the inside of a CDMO, you kind of understand how scheduling works and how capacity is mapped. And as an innovator, it's important to understand what the capacity availability is, how far companies are booking out, who controls that capacity. And then also an important consideration is how many commercial projects do they have? I mean, they could be internal generic projects or external innovator projects. And something I found really useful, both on the inside of a CDMO and on the innovator side, is the ability to leverage if a company has commercial projects to create more opportunity in the plant. So potentially a company could move out a commercial batch because they have more visibility on the timing of its delivery to allow you to squeeze in an additional API batch. On the other side, the projects that we do as innovators, there's inherent risk there. And sometimes we end up delaying a project. And that creates a gap in the CDMO's plant. If they have commercial manufacturing, sometimes, what I've done in the past is we've moved forward a commercial project to bridge that gap and to minimize the impact on the CDMO, but also the financial impact of paying for plant time that's not being used. I think another, linked with this, with commercial manufacturing, obviously, if your CDMO has commercial capabilities, it's obviously an advantage because you may not need to tech transfer processes between vendors. They know how to validate. They know how to routinely manufacture things efficiently. Another example on the kind of manufacturing side is it can be really important to understand how the plant operates, how the shift rotation is. Is it 12-hour shifts 5 days a week? Is it a full 24 hours a day, 7 days a week operation? And how is it staffed on those more, off hours? Unfortunately, things tend to go wrong at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, right? When often there's limited on-site support, the QA coverage might not be there, QC may be limited. So understanding what that staffing is can really help you plan when you want to do certain activities. You don't want to be running your critical IPC for a validation process over the weekend. You want to, unless you've got the staffing there to ensure if anything wobbles, you can deal with it. And so just looking at the, things that may not be obvious unless you've been on the inside of a CDMO can help you, navigate a path to success when you're working, particularly in a virtual setting. Another final comment is on the business side. And as Ken mentioned, CDMOs work to budgets. We all do. And often CDMOs can be driven by quarterly numbers and particularly year-end numbers. And that can influence how they behave. and it can drive them to pushing to ship material before the end of their fiscal year so they can realize the revenue. And that if you understand that, then you can work with a company to try and help them navigate this and come up with a mutually agreeable approach to invoicing that works well for both sides. I mean, these are just a couple of examples, but kind of to tie this up, I think having people with CDMO experience on your team can help a company understand why certain decisions are made at CDMOs, and how to navigate these to get outcomes that work for both sides. So you can really, collaborate well. And if you don't understand why, it'll help you figure out what threads to pull on to get the understanding. So that's kind of where I want to end this. There's just a lot of being on the inside gives you a unique perspective, and it can be really, really helpful for innovators. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Steve. Some additional great insight. For the audience, I know we're getting some Q&A coming in. So what we're going to do is go through the panelists first, let them make their introductory comments, and then we'll start taking your comments from the Q&A section. So we see them, and that's great. Keep them coming in. But next, I'd like to ask Charlie Montgomery, who's the Senior Director of CMC at Aldera Therapeutics, to provide his thoughts and insights on this topic.
Got your mute off, Charlie?
Lewis, I told you that would happen.
You did.
Sorry, guys. For a second, I looked good, even if I didn't sound good, okay? Okay, so what I was just saying there is I'm probably going to stick out a little bit like a sore thumb as I change tact here. And I want to cover what I hope won't sound like a sales pitch to hire guys like us, but it might do, and I'll apologize in advance for that. But I'd like to cover some soft skills that certain people from CDMOs bring to the equation when they move across the telephone or across town to come and work at innovator companies. And what soft skills am I talking about? Well, it can be going out drinking and playing golf. They're good soft skills to have as well. But I'm talking about skills like relationship building, conflict resolution, leadership skills, and the ability to multitask on various levels. So I just want to go a few through them, tell you a little bit why they might be important to have in your group. And I'm going to preface that by saying that it's not just CDMOs that have guys that have good soft skills. They're all over. It's just that when you have the skills are used a lot more in CDMOs, especially the ones I just mentioned. They're interacting with different personalities, different companies all the time, and they get the chance to put these soft skills to use more often. So you might say, well, really, I don't really need to form good relationships with vendors, and I would say that's not really true. Speaking from years on the other side of the fence, I've built a lot of great relationships with various innovator companies over the years, and I've known people that I don't want to ever work with again. And there's people that I would crawl across broken glass to help, and there's some clients that I would tie to the back of a horse and drag through a field of broken glass if they wanted to do business with me. And for me, I'd like to be of the former, not just because I don't want to be dragged through a field of broken glass, but because if you have a good relationship with your suppliers, your vendors, they go above and beyond for you. Though, and speaking from experience on both sides, I've learned to treat people with respect at all times and get the most out of them and leverage their skills and what they are bringing to the table as well. I think that's quite important. And as relationships go, the guys you hire from CDMOs often come with a huge network of contacts, not just within other CDMOs, but within other areas, other fields as well. And that's always useful to have around. I think everybody has been forced to deal with conflict at one time or other in their careers. And there's different types of conflict, of course. There's internal conflict with the guys in your own organization as you jockey for position and try and keep yourself off the critical path. We all know that CMC is always on the critical path, and we have to live with that. But when you're at a CDMO, you're dealing with conflicts on a daily basis, and those internal conflicts are winning resources for your clients that you're working with. Conflict over when we put resources in place, conflicts over when we're going to bill for money, as we just heard, as we need money to do everything. And these conflicts are often resolved through negotiation. So you find that a lot of guys at coming in from CDMOs are really good at negotiating internally, but that also translates to external as you try and negotiate with your CDMOs for better deals, better timelines. I find myself going through that right now, where I'm trying to get better timelines off of some of my CMC programs at my current position. And those skills have helped a lot. And it helps that you also know the internal workings of a CDMO as well, and what they really want. And sometimes it doesn't gel with what you really need, but if you can come to a common ground, that really helps. So I think conflict resolution is something that ex-CDMO guys can be very good at, especially those that have been successful in CDMOs. Leadership skills is something that you often see in job descriptions as well, and when people bring various leadership skills to the table too. I would propose that because of the business setup for many CDMOs, for a few people, there are the opportunity to develop some really great leadership skills. And CDMOs overhead has to be as minimal as possible, because they're in it to make money at the end of the day. If they're not making money, they can't operate, and they can't serve you. They can't serve the innovator companies well. And so you often find certain folks at CDMOs have a large group of people reporting to them, and that's, sometimes that some people like to boast about that, but others take that experience for what it is, and it's valuable experience in managing others, managing different types of people, and so CDMO leaders, I find, generally are used to leading larger groups of individuals. Their skills at relationship building, at managing others, are actually very good, and it's something they should always look for as well in your hiring along those lines. Certainly, as far as leaders and CDMOs, it really is a case of survival of the fittest, and for me, maybe survival of the fattest as well. But yeah, I usually find the cream rises to the top in CDMOs, and those are the guys that have a lot of experience that can really help you out in your programs. And probably one of the most important ones is the ability to multitask. I think as the guys going behind me and the guys that will come and were in front of me too know that we like to think as innovator companies that we're the only ones with a project at the CDMO partner, but that's very rarely the case. And they're often managing multiple projects, multiple clients at the same time, and there's a lot going on. And so sometimes you're not getting full attention. I mean, if you are getting full attention, you've probably got yourself a really good project manager there. But yeah, so multitasking in a CDMO is a little bit different from multitasking in an innovator company. And I've spoken to at least one of the panelists about some of the stories we'd hear when we were back in our old days in the CDMO side. Everybody was really busy, crazy busy all the time, never had time to give us information, never had time for this or that. And as we moved over, we were talking among ourselves about, wow, it's not as bad as we thought it was. On the innovator side of things, and if looking back now, the level of absolute terror and absolute thrill ride of working in a CDMO serves us very well as we've moved into the innovator space. And I think all of these soft skills are invaluable as we go forward, especially to early phase companies who are very science orientated and are looking for people to come in and actually manage timelines, manage budgets. I think the guys that you're talking to in this panel have all those skills and could be very useful, and happily answer any questions in this, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I'll turn it over to the next panelist.
Hey, Patty, let me just jump in here for 1 second and say, many years ago, I may have brought Charlie some of those customers that he wanted to drag through the glass, as he said, but I'll assure everyone he never did that, and he took it out on me, the business development guy who brought him the customer, but he was always number one with the customer. So I thought I'd just interject that.
Too kind, Lewis, too kind.
Yeah, that's great. No, I love the stories, Charlie. No, thanks. It's I think all of us who have worked on the CMO side and the sponsor side we like to joke saying we can't make this stuff up. Things happen. It's sort of how you collectively roll with it and just move on and learn from those things and do better next time. So that's great. So next, I would like to hear from Bernard Paul, who's the president and principal consultant with Current Consulting.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. I'm really excited to be here and be able to talk a little bit about one specific activity that I think can make a massive difference on the outcome of a project. And this is something that I've seen over and over again in my time at CDMOs, in biotech, and now as an independent consultant. And that's how you get a project started right. And that makes sense, of course, if you get projects started the right way. That's usually a recipe for success. And it also avoids, banging your head against the wall, which I've read burns 150 calories an hour, but there are probably some easier ways how you can lose some of that quarantine weight and get your projects, at the CDMOs to run correctly. Again, I've seen over and over again how sponsor companies get this wrong and fail to get the project started off in the right way. Of course, it's ultimately up to the CDMO to execute on the project, but it's your responsibility, I think, as a sponsor to provide expectations and also to set the framework for how you'd like to operate. So I'd really like to encourage everyone to have a formal project kickoff meeting, even for projects that are fairly small or might seem on first glance everything is completely clear. Well, I'll tell you in a minute why I think that's important. Of course, ideally you'd like to do this in person, and that's hard to do at the moment in the situation we live in, but I'm sure that'll change again in the future. And so we have to rely on technology to help us out as we do today. So what are some of the things that I've seen from my experience are really important that you cover in a project kickoff meeting? The first thing I'd suggest is that you provide a thorough overview of your company, the technology platform, the disease you're targeting, and how your drug can help patients. This is really important and somewhat obvious, but easy to forget. Because you want to build that engagement with the scientists at the CDMO. Trust me, everyone who works at a CDMO is as interested as you are in helping people with disease, in improving the lives of patients, and just making a difference. But it's harder to do that at a CDMO because you're further away from things. That if you work in a biotech, you probably have regular meetings to talk about the disease, you talk to advocates and patients. You don't really have that in the CDMO. So if you kind of bring that to the scientists at your collaborators, you'll see a huge difference in the level of engagement that you'll see. The next thing that's really important, and a lot of companies, I think, get this wrong, is outlining expectations and providing information. And I think this comes from the fact that a typical project with a CDMO has quite a long lead time leading up to the actual project. I mean, you're speaking to business development multiple times, there'll be proposals, revisions. So it's natural to assume that all that information that you shared and all those discussions you had will make it to the project team. But my experience from doing many of these projects is that a lot of times it doesn't. And of course, that creates a problem because you assume everyone knows what you've said all along, but the people who actually execute the chemistry or whatever the project is have never heard this before. So I'd really suggest starting at zero, going through everything again, the history, the contract, the deliverable. And it's also a good way of outlining your expectations when it comes to communication, project-specific items. And yes, it might seem a little bit redundant, but I think that investment of those 30 minutes or so that it might take to go through that will turn out to be a really smart investment and avoids a lot of meetings later on to fix problems. And then the final item that I think is really important is to provide background and shared context. Now, why is that important? I think at times as sponsors, we can be overly focused on providing very limited information about the problem that needs to be solved. And that leads to frustration on both sides. I remember a project from several years ago where at the early stages of the project, there was a lot of confusion on both sides, a lot of questions like, well, why did you run this experiment and not that one? Why did you change that? We didn't want you to change that. And we ultimately actually solved that by convincing the sponsor company to hold a kickoff meeting 3 weeks after we'd already started and kind of do a reset and have them talk about what they wanted to accomplish, what were some of the regulatory constraints in terms of what's been filed. And suddenly the CDMO was able to bring a lot more to the table. And if you think about it, this is how you approach that in your own internal team. I think many of us have seen that difference that it makes how you state a problem. If you tell a scientist to run an experiment, they'll run that reaction. But if you tell someone, what's the problem? Why is it important that we solve it? He or she will go off and use their hands in their head to solve that problem. And it works the same thing with CDMOs. So again, I strongly believe it's really important to get things started the right way. And these are a couple other things you can consider there. Obviously, there are many other things you might want to cover. But I'll stop here and we can go into more details later during the Q&A.
Terrific. Thanks, Bernard. That was excellent insight. And so our last panelist, Lisa Wyman, who's the VP of Technical Operations and Quality at Acceleron Pharma. Let's hear what you have to share with the audience and the panelists.
Great. Thank you, Patty. Well, that's a tough act to follow, so I'm going to share a little bit of a different perspective. And it's really about positioning your CDMO to your competitive advantage. And what I mean by that is thinking about your CDMO or your supplier as an extension of your team, or a way to fill gaps or support your evolving or adapting pipeline. So CDMOs today are under a significant amount of pressure to really adapt, evolve, and innovate. And so there's an opportunity for us, especially at small and mid-sized biotech companies, to take advantage of that. The folks who work at CDMOs have seen many successful and not so successful clinical and commercial manufacturing campaigns. So how can you leverage that expertise or capability and kind of integrate that into your team? And so what we've done at Acceleron is to really leverage our CDMOs to kind of fill, whether it's capability gaps, capacity gaps, or even state-of-the-art technology or best-in-class solutions. So we facilitated more of like a quarterly technical review or technical conversation where we provide our strategic plan, our portfolio plan. We have a really transparent, open dialogue quarterly. And we have found that the resources at the CDMOs have been able to really provide insights on flexible CMC strategies and solutions. So for example, we had a clinical stage program, and we're looking to transition that to be like a self-administered product. And so we've leveraged CMOs to support us with some drug formulation, and then also some level of expertise to convert that injectable, which is done by healthcare providers today, to kind of a pre-filled syringe combination device. And then another way is we've kind of leveraged the CDMO to kind of give us some experience or expertise on a really wide, broad global quality and regulatory landscape. And those are all kind of capabilities or gaps that we didn't have in-house to support. But by facilitating this collaboration, organizing a quarterly technical review and conversation that allows proactive dialogue and engagement on both sides, we've really been able to leverage our CDMOs to bolster our CMC strategy. We've reduced cycle times, and then we've also been able to really innovate without a significant amount of capital expense or infrastructure. And then I know there was some discussion today about kind of the attributes or the leadership traits that staff who have worked at CDMOs kind of can bring to your organization. And I know personally for me, at Acceleron, we are rapidly growing and we're always looking for talent, but there are some attributes that I look for individuals today. And I feel like specifically these attributes are really in the folks who work at CDMOs today. And those are around learning agility. So our pipeline right now is strong in the proteins biologic space, but we're moving towards small molecules or other modalities, and people in the CDMO space have that broad technical diversity and the ability to work in a fast-paced environment, wear many hats, and then being in like an engineering or a science-based role, a lot of times you don't have the opportunity to get exposed to business acumen. And so those are some kind of differentiating attributes that we are looking for our talent as we recruit, but those are specific skills that I feel like staff at CDMOs possess today. And so one thought that I would like to leave you with is don't think of your organization and your CDMO organization as kind of a we versus them. It's one team, and especially in the eyes of global regulators, right? You as a sponsor are ultimately responsible for what happens at your CDMOs. And I think there may be some conference questions around, quality agreements and quality decision making. And so the example that I gave with the quarterly business review, we have the quality folks from both Acceleron and the CDMO sit at that table during that review, and we really engage in dialogue that brings kind of the quality and compliance as well as the technical aligned under kind of one aligned execution-focused team. And so, you have quality agreements, but no one looks at them, or there's deviations and there may be misalignment on classification. But, you have to trust the engineers, the manufacturing folks, and the quality professionals on the other side. And if you don't, my challenge to you is that you probably have the wrong supplier or the wrong partner. And so they're really an extension of your team. So you need to give them a little bit of freedom or flexibility to work within the constraints of their CDMO and really approach that relationship as a partnership. And that's where I think with a lot of merger and acquisition and consolidation activity in our space today, positioning your organization with the right CDMO will give you the competitive advantage. And as you know, everyone's got the secret sauce. It's just who gets there first. So thank you, Patty.
Thank you, Lisa. That's great. And thanks to all the panelists for providing their initial insights. I think we covered a lot of great territory, giving some good feedback on best practices. And so now there are many, many comments or questions, I should say, from the participants. So Lisa, I'm going to stay with you for just a second because one of them is quite relevant to what you just talked about. And it's around whether, a company should put together formal SOPs on how to govern and manage CDMOs, or whether those types of things should be best left to the quality agreements, as you mentioned, or the MSA. What are your recommendations or best practices for that?
Well, I mean, I think the MSA or the supply agreements and the quality agreements really define kind of the rules of engagement, but it doesn't translate well into how you as like SMEs or FTEs in the business go about your day-to-day operations. And so my recommendation is that you either have you know, kind of standards for vendor management, supplier management, or oversight, but don't have, you know, kind of those standards of SOP so prescriptive that, you know, kind of you're deviating as you manage multiple relationships. But I do think it is a best practice to have an SOP or some type of guidance document that, you know, as you onboard new employees, you can train. You can use that as a guide on how cross-functional teams, tech transfer teams interact. And then also is there's more and more scrutiny and expectation from a health authority perspective that sponsors have clearly defined roles and responsibilities of oversight of vendors that really extend beyond quality agreements. So I find more in industry that there's some high-level principles that professionals are translating into SOPs.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much. So Steve, I'd like to pose a question to you from the audience as well. So you talked about sort of allocating the workload across potentially multiple service providers. So how do you go about really, you know, managing that in a cost-effective manner because of the, you know, extra oversight requirements of spreading the work out?
So it depends on the work, right? One of the keys is if you're going to do that, it needs to be a discrete work package that you can kind of carve out and then bring back in afterwards. And cost-wise, if it's an impurity synthesis or it's a spike and purge, you know, the impurity synthesis is pretty straightforward. If it's a spike and purge, you would need to, you know, send over the analytical methods. So you can consider if you're going to have a second supplier in the future, that could be a company that you do some of this work with, so that you're already embedding the methods there for the future. And it's a difficult question to answer because all the different CDMOs have different cost structures. And if it's like an analytical method development, if you go to a specialized provider, they can probably do that faster and more efficiently than a more multifaceted provider. So I know that's not like a great answer in many ways, but it's kind of, it depends is the response. And I don't know what any of the others on the panel have got any thoughts on that.
Sure, maybe if any others want to pipe in on one or two comments on that regarding, you know, spreading out the work packages.
Perhaps I'll say, Patty, Charlie here. I mean, I think if there's time to do that, I think it's great because you can take advantage of running things in parallel if you can, and you can manage the costs as well. You maybe get a lower cost. I think what I've seen for some things, especially as you look at it, drug substance, drug product type of stuff, and the timelines are extremely tight. Sometimes it's best to keep them at one vendor. In that case, of a single case where, you know, you can save some time with analytical method transfers and things like this. But I think overall, I think if you can, for the type of stuff that Steve was just talking about, that's a great opportunity to take advantage of expertise that a particular CDMO might not have.
Hey, Patty, I would add to that. Nowadays, it's almost it's unusual, despite having all these services being put together at a single CDMO, for a biotech, most specifically a pharma, to not spread things around. So we talk about all-in-one, and we can go from development to so many kilos. But you know, a prudent strategy for biotechs and again, pharma perhaps particularly, is to have a backup plan. And that backup plan often And like you said, Patty, might be not the most cost efficient, but is to have another CDMO there who knows what's going on as well. So I think, particularly when you're getting into larger scale, to be a biotech and, decide that, maybe we ought to split a couple of these batches up into different CDMOs. While it sounds tricky, costly, it may not be a bad strategy. And I think that strategy still plays out a lot in the industry.
Yeah, no, very true, for sure. I think general good, overall supply chain management almost demands that you have redundancy built in to some degree for those high risk areas for, unfortunately, things like pandemics or natural disasters or, other types of technical issues that may happen at the respective CMOs. So really doing that thorough analysis and having a really robust business continuity plan as well. So whether it's, continuing clinical supply, but more importantly is commercial supply. And how do you ensure that you do not have any disruptions due to the many things that are, obvious that can disrupt supply chains. But some of the things, I'm sure there'd be very, very few companies that had pandemics in their business continuity plans 6 months ago, but there's probably not a company that exists today that will not have that in their business continuity plan going forward, without a doubt, because it's we're in a new normal going forward. So one of the other questions, I think this one's fascinating, it probably could be a program on its own. The contract industry as a whole has been experiencing a ton of consolidation. And so would like to hear experiences. So when your CMO gets bought by someone else and how that relationship gets affected and, what you have to do with that going forward. So maybe how about we start with Ken first, and then others who might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Patty. So 1 year, every CDMO I worked with was either acquired or acquired somebody else. So, the last couple of years, it's been very prevalent. I think it can go two ways. I've seen it where a new owners come in and really put their stamp on the CDMO and really work with them through the transition. And it's been somewhat seamless. And then it's worked to our advantage where, you've been opened up to other abilities within that network. I've also seen it where the work that you've had done there has really declined. Often when a new owner comes in, you see a lot of turnover of staff, and especially in the program management type area where it's critical. Once you lose that key program manager, it's really tough to keep that relationship going. So there's certainly been cases where we've had somebody come in, acquire that company, and really we've struggled with that transition and actually had to move on. I think one of the key struggles I've had personally is we've lost a lot of the good smaller CDMOs, those ones that can really help you with some of the earlier phase stuff, and they keep getting acquired by some of the larger organizations, and they tend to sort of move away from what was their niche, what they were good at, and try to become all-encompassing. And so I've seen that be a challenge for us too. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts.
This is Lisa. I have the opportunity to be an employee in an organization where I've acquired companies or been in the midst of a merger and acquisition, as well as overseeing CDMOs, have been in the same situation. And kind of my guidance or recommendation for those of you who are managing CDMOs when a merger integration happens is to kind of really align quickly on what kind of like the top 3 or top 4 priorities are, and maybe assign expectations or metrics or measurements to monitor that progress. And I know Steve talked a little bit about employee turnover, but one of those attributes that you want to make sure that you keep track of is making sure that you don't have kind of that knowledge of those SMEs walking out the door. So make sure that in addition to like the technical or timeline priorities, make sure there's like a personnel or human factor on that scorecard to make sure that your retention rate is not dipping, which will compromise those priorities. So I think it's setting clear expectations up front, right as kind of the deal closes, scheduling routine and frequent conversations, aligning on what good looks like. So collaborating and establishing those metrics, and then holding each other accountable for delivering during that significant time of change and transition, because it is extremely difficult to be on both sides through an M&A activity.
Yeah, that's so important, because some of the acquisitions are, both horizontal and vertical integration. So depending on which direction they're going, it could have advantages by adding capabilities that they didn't have before, or just adding, depth, but also the risk of losing key talent is very real. And I know I've certainly seen that happen with some of these great boutique service providers get a little bit overwhelmed when they've become part of a much larger organization. And I think that's something for the larger companies that are doing the acquisitions to be painfully aware of, because then the value of their acquisition is unfortunately not going to be fully realized. So I want to move on to a couple of other questions as well. In the new normal, as I mentioned, we're living in, one of the challenges is the inability to get on site at some of these CDMOs to do compliance audits and/or a person in the plant during production. So maybe, Lisa, I'll start with you on compliance audits and how CDMOs and sponsors are dealing with that real challenge.
Yeah, so I was smiling. I don't know if anyone could see that, because we're in the midst of some pretty significant drug substance campaigns, and just coming off of a tech transfer, and my tech ops staff have not been allowed on site. So there's lots of heightened anxiety with my tech ops personnel, but we've also had key supplier audits, both from a GMP manufacturing perspective, but also on our clinical trial sites. And we have fully converted all of those audits to virtual. So there's a lot of preparation that gets done in advance of the virtual audit. We've tried to request some items. We send an agenda in advance. We request some documents, download on a secure SharePoint. We do a lot of review and conversation and questions via email. And then we have kind of a Zoom level virtual audit for about a full day. So we've done that. And then for kind of person and plant activities, we've used kind of video technology that's been available in the plant to kind of monitor our process. And then we've done kind of shift exchange, start and end time video meetings with review of data and conversation to make sure that we keep the engagement and the technical touch points very high. But I do feel like we joked around. I joked around this morning with my finance partner. We've saved about $1 million in tech ops on travel alone. And so I was like, oh no, but we still need to visit our suppliers. Like, don't take that budget away. And it's just been a tremendous amount of productivity and efficiency that we've been able to maintain in the remote environment. So I think it's high engagement, high touch point, and then a lot of preparation on the quality audit side to make sure that you get what you need up front. And then during the virtual day-long audit, you can have some of those more of those candid conversations, those interviews, virtually.
Great. So maybe perhaps Charlie or others, do you want to add into some of these thoughts too, or others experiencing similar issues getting on site for various activities?
Yeah, I mean, like Lisa, I mean, I must say I'm not at Aldera anymore. So I moved a couple of months ago, and my new gig is at Skyhawk Therapeutics, and we're just getting geared up to do some GMP manufacturing. So we're coming to that point right now, and the vendors we're talking to, they're also doing this virtual audit stuff as well. I've no idea how it's going to go, and I'm looking forward to seeing what it's all about. But yeah, right now we haven't done anything, so I really can't comment with this COVID situation right now. But I can only imagine it's kind of tough right now, and maybe we'll be traveling again soon. You never know, or maybe not.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can add a few comments to that. I've been through a few virtual audits, recently, and they're quite useful, as Lisa said. I mean, you can still get some information, but I think you really, if you've done that and if you've been through some of these meetings, there is no way to replace being on site. I mean, a virtual audit is, I think, a good way to check that box. But I don't think you will find the same things that you would find in an audit on site. And the same thing with person in plant. I mean, there's something to being there, kind of being able to listen to the conversations, the general vibe of the site. That's going to be very hard to replace, virtually. And again, that's, I think, why all of us are looking forward to that time where we can make these trips again.
Yeah. So I don't know, Steve or Ken, any thoughts on that before we would probably coming up to the top of the hour. So we'll start looking to wrap up and get some final comments.
Yeah, I mean, we're the same. I'd say certainly we're looking at, virtual audits, and certainly it's challenging, the man and plant aspect. We've done a couple of campaigns, and, we've utilized, phones and Zoom and done the best we can. We've been lucky. There's been no major challenges. I think the issues will come where we see significant challenges, and it would be very beneficial to be there when they come up.
Yeah, just one comment from me. We had a validation in Italy, and there was just no way we could be there. So fortunately, we have a good partner there. So we already knew that they could execute well, but there's just no way we could have done the man in plant. And sometimes you gotta put your trust in your partners, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's I think
very well said.
Yeah, I think Patty, this is really the theme of what we're talking about today. Is if you are a biotech or a pharma and you have professionals within your organization that have worked at CDMOs, take advantage of them, particularly during these last 6 months. What better resource to have than to have your colleagues who may have worked at that CDMO in the most extreme, or at least have been at CDMOs and can help you do that. And really, that was the theme of what we were talking about today. And we, I think we proved that out, that take advantage of your resources, your colleagues, seek them out that have been at CDMOs before. There are so many of them now in the industry. And I think we're at the point where we decided, look, let's make sure everybody actually utilizes these resources.
It's terrific. So I know we have 1 or 2 minutes left, Louis, so can we just ask our panelists then to just do 30 seconds of parting thoughts and words of wisdom?
Yep, that sounds great.
So maybe we can start with Ken and work through Ken, Steve, Charlie, Bernard, and Lisa.
Thanks, Patty. Yeah, I think I want to emphasize some of the points that Charlie made. I spent the early part of my career at a CDMO, and it was the greatest, training ground possible for what we do now. I'm glad that I moved over to the innovator side. That has a lot of benefits too, but certainly I miss the buzz and hype of activity at the CDMOs, and I really enjoy collaborating with those guys. They're top notch. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I mean, to be successful at a CDMO, you've got to be able to think on your feet. You've got to be good, and there's some really, really good people in CDMOs. If you can build the right relationship with the right CDMO, it can be a great experience for all concerned. They can really augment the capabilities that you have, not just with hands, but with really, really good technical inputs and strategy inputs.
And then for me, I guess a couple of words of wisdom. Hey, have fun, build relationships, and get what you need to out of these vendors. They're ready to help you. They're willing to help you, and they don't need a lot of input from us. But it's always nice if we can exploit what they're good at and get out of the way and let them deliver for us. That's about all the words of wisdom I have for you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think from my end, maybe one parting thought is, we talk quite a bit about MSAs and quality agreements and maybe SOPs that govern it. These are all documents that operate at a very high level. It's up to you, to kind of make this work on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's no different than any other relationship that if you put a little bit of time in, you'll get a massive, payout in return.
Great. And my one parting thought is to think about your CDMOs as part of your professional network. They have a significant amount of access to world-class science, technology, chemistry, and people. So think about how you will utilize that CDMO network professionally, whether it's to recruit talent, fill gaps for capability or expertise in your organization. So thank you.
Terrific. Well, thanks so much for all the panelists. Great discussion. Thanks, Louis, for organizing everything. And thanks to the audience for listening and the great questions.
Yes, thanks so much, Patty. Great job of moderating. The speakers, thank you. And we have a list of questions from the attendees. We're not just going to close the browser and forget about those questions. I commit to looking into answers for our attendees and our readers. We may take a bit of a summer break here at OP Virtual, but obviously we are not taking a break at outsourcepharma.com. I hope you will all continue to be readers. I'd love to hear from you. Anyone who has an idea for what we should be talking about, what you would like to read, please let me know. Thank you all again. Stay safe, everyone. Enjoy the summer. Until next time, goodbye from Outsourced Pharma.